The cabin door swung open before Kerra's fist could fall, and the human man stood there, snow-dusted and holding a lantern, his eyes already on the place where her roof had been before the weight of winter crushed it into splinters. She stood frozen in the storm, her green skin slick with melting snow, her small tusks visible as her breath came in quick clouds, and she hated that he had seen this, hated that of all the homesteads scattered across this forsaken frontier, his was the closest when disaster struck. The wind howled around them both, carrying ice that stung like needles, and Kerra watched the human's face for the disgust she expected, the fear, the hatred that humans always showed when they looked at orcs. Instead, his dark eyes moved from her face to the bundled shape she carried against her chest, wrapped in every blanket she had managed to grab before the ceiling came down. "Inside," he said, stepping back without ceremony, without question, and Kerra's pride warred with the cold reality that her daughter was shivering despite the layers. She crossed his threshold because she had no choice, because the alternative was watching Mina freeze in the wreckage of their home. And as the door closed behind them, shutting out the screaming wind, the warmth of his fire hit her like a physical thing. The cabin was small but well kept. A single room with a stone fireplace that crackled with good oak, shelves lined with preserves and dried herbs, a sturdy bed in one corner, and a table with 2 chairs near the window. The human gestured to the rocking chair closest to the fire, the better seat, and Kerra hesitated before lowering herself into it, her arms tight around the precious bundle she carried. "Let me see her," the human said, and Kerra's head snapped up, her jaw setting in automatic defiance before she registered that his tone held no command, only concern. He crouched beside the chair, keeping himself lower than her seated position, his hands open and empty. "I am not trying to take her. I want to make sure she is not hurt." Kerra slowly unwrapped the outermost blanket, revealing Mina's small face, green like her mother's but rounder, softer, still holding the delicate features of childhood. Her daughter's eyes were squeezed shut against the world, her breathing shallow, and Kerra felt her chest constrict with a fear she refused to name. She hit her head when the beam fell, Kerra heard herself say, the words rough in her throat. She woke up crying, but then she got quiet, and I cannot get her to open her eyes. The human's expression shifted, something focusing in his gaze that reminded Kerra of the battlefield surgeons she had known in her younger years, before she had left the clans, before she had tried to build a life away from the endless warring. He moved to the shelves and returned with a small leather case, kneeling beside the rocking chair again. "My name is James Thornton," he said as he opened the case, revealing neat rows of medical supplies, bandages and salves and small glass vials. "I was a field medic in the border wars. I am going to examine your daughter if you will allow it." Kerra stared at him, this human man who had opened his door before she could knock, who had seen her roof collapse from his window perhaps, or heard it over the storm's rage. James Thornton, who kept medical supplies like someone who expected to need them, who lived alone on the frontier far from any town. Her instincts screamed that this was wrong, that humans could not be trusted, that he must want something, must have some angle she could not yet see. But Mina's breathing was too shallow, and Kerra's knowledge of healing extended to battlefield wounds and broken bones, not to the mysterious injuries of children. "Do it," she said, and hated how her voice shook. James's hands were gentle as he examined Mina, his fingers checking the bump on her forehead, lifting each of her eyelids to study her pupils in the firelight, feeling along her neck and spine with careful pressure. Kerra watched his face, reading the concentration there, the way his brow furrowed and then smoothed. The pupils are responding, he said finally. That is good. The bump is bad, but I have seen worse that healed clean. She needs warmth and rest and to be watched through the night. If she has bleeding in her skull, we will know in the next few hours. He met Kerra's eyes directly, and she saw no deception there, only honesty that felt almost cruel in its plainness. I will not lie to you. It could go either way. But she has a fighting chance, and that is more than you would have had in a collapsed cabin in a snowstorm. Kerra nodded, her throat too tight for words, and James rose smoothly, moving to the fire to add another log, to adjust the placement of the rocking chair so that the heat would reach them better. He brought her a cup of something hot that smelled of herbs and honey, pressed it into her free hand. Drink, he said. You are soaked through, and you will be no good to her if you freeze. The liquid burned going down, warming her from the inside, and Kerra realized with a distant sort of shock that she was shaking, her whole body trembling with cold and fear and the aftermath of dragging her daughter through the snow. James disappeared behind a curtain that sectioned off a corner of the cabin and returned with dry clothes, a shirt and pants that would be too large for her but were better than the wet rags she wore. I will turn my back, he said. Change and wrap yourself in the blankets. I will keep watch on your daughter. It was absurd, this human man offering her privacy, offering help without asking for payment or favor. Kerra wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to her suspicion like armor, but practicality won over pride. She changed quickly, painfully aware of James standing with his back turned, his posture relaxed as though he truly did not care to look. The dry clothes were warm and smelled of cedar and wood smoke, and when she had bundled herself and Mina in the blankets James provided, she felt almost human herself, almost safe. James turned back when she settled into the rocking chair again, and he pulled the other chair close, sitting where he could see Mina's face. The night stretched ahead of them, the storm hammering against the cabin walls, and Kerra found herself in the strangest vigil of her life, watching her daughter's shallow breathing while a human stranger kept watch beside her. Why did you open the door? She asked, breaking the silence that had grown too heavy. You knew it was me, an orc. You could have pretended to be asleep. James was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low, thoughtful. I heard the crack of timber over the wind. I looked out and saw your roof was gone. I thought about the cabin and what it meant, that someone was living there, that they might need help. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. I did not know you were an orc until I opened the door, but it would not have mattered. A person in need is a person in need. Most humans would not agree, Kerra said, and there was more bitterness in her voice than she intended. Most humans are fools, James replied, and there was no heat in it, just statement of fact. I have been to war. I have seen what we do to each other, human and orc alike. I came out here to get away from all of that, to build something that was not about killing. He rubbed his face, and Kerra saw the tiredness there, the weight of years. I am not interested in old hatreds. I am interested in whether your daughter lives through the night. The bluntness of it struck Kerra silent, and she looked down at Mina's face, so small and vulnerable in the blankets. Her daughter had been born 3 years ago, in the cabin. Kerra had built with her own hands, far from the orc clans that would have called her a traitor for leaving, far from the human settlements that would have driven her out or worse. She had thought she could make a life here, on the edges of the frontier where no one cared what you were as long as you kept to yourself. The roof collapsing felt like judgment, like the world telling her that she could not escape, that there was no safe place for a half-blood orc child and her exile mother. She is stirring, James said suddenly, leaning forward, and Kerra's attention snapped back to Mina. Her daughter's eyelids were fluttering, her small hands moving under the blankets, and then her eyes opened, unfocused and confused. "Mama." Mina's voice was a thin whisper, and Kerra felt something break open in her chest. "I am here, little Tusk," Kerra said, smoothing Mina's dark hair back from her forehead. "You are safe. You hit your head, but you are going to be fine." Mina's eyes drifted to James, and Kerra saw her daughter's confusion deepen. "Who is that?" "My name is James," he said gently, staying in his chair, making no move to loom or crowd. "You are in my cabin because your roof fell down. Your mama brought you here to stay warm." Mina blinked slowly, processing this, and then her face crumpled. "My toys," she said, and started to cry. Not the wailing of pain, but the broken-hearted sobs of a child who has lost something precious. Kerra held her daughter close, rocking slowly, murmuring comfort, and over Mina's head she caught James's eyes. He looked away quickly, but not before she saw something there that might have been understanding, or sympathy, or some complicated human emotion she could not name. The night crawled by in increments of worry and relief. Mina would drift back to sleep, and Kerra would watch her with held breath, terrified that she would not wake again. And then her daughter would stir and complain about her head hurting, and Kerra would feel grateful for the complaints. James moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, making food that Kerra forced herself to eat, checking Mina's pupils every hour, adding wood to the fire to keep the warmth constant. He did not try to make conversation, did not pry into her story or ask why an orc woman was living alone with a child on the frontier. He simply existed in the space, useful and unobtrusive, and Kerra found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, trying to understand what manner of human this was. James Thornton was not young, she thought, perhaps in his mid-30s, with the kind of lean strength that came from hard work rather than training. His hair was dark brown, starting to gray at the temples, kept short in a practical style. His face was weathered from sun and wind, marked with thin scars that spoke of violence survived, and his hands were the hands of someone who knew how to build and mend and fight if needed. He moved with the economy of someone who had lived alone for a long time, who did not waste motion or words. When the storm finally broke near dawn, the silence was almost shocking. Kerra had dozed in the rocking chair, her arms around Mina, and she woke to pale light filtering through the window and the smell of cooking porridge. James was at the stove stirring the pot, and when he noticed she was awake he ladled out 2 bowls, bringing one to her. "She should eat when she wakes," he said. "And you should eat now. You have had a long night." Kerra accepted the bowl, her stomach growling despite her exhaustion. The porridge was plain but good, sweetened with honey and dried berries, and she ate mechanically, refueling more than tasting. Mina woke soon after, grumpy and sore but alert, and Kerra felt the knot of terror in her chest finally begin to loosen. Her daughter was going to be all right. "I need to see the cabin," Kerra said after Mina had eaten and was drowsing in the rocking chair again. "I need to know what can be salvaged." James nodded, pulling on his coat. "I will come with you. The snow will be deep." They trudged through the drifts in the gray morning light, their breath steaming, and when they rounded the bend that brought Kerra's cabin into view, she stopped dead. The roof had not just collapsed in one place, but had caved in almost entirely, the weight of wet snow crushing the rafters she had cut and placed with such care. The walls still stood, but everything inside would be ruined, buried under timber and ice. "It is gone," she said, and the words came out flat, empty of emotion because there was too much emotion to hold. James walked a slow circle around the wreckage, examining it with the same careful attention he had given to Mina's injury. When he returned to her side, His expression was serious. "The walls are sound," he said. "The foundation is good. You built well, but the rafters were not strong enough for this kind of snow load. It happens. This was a bad storm, heavier than most." He paused, considering. "It can be rebuilt. It will take time and materials, but it can be done." Kerra laughed, and it came out bitter. "I have no coin for materials. I have nothing but what I carried out last night." "Then you will stay in my cabin while we rebuild," James said, as though this were obvious, as though there were no other option to consider. Kerra turned to stare at him. "You cannot be serious. You do not know me. You do not know what I have done, why I am here alone. I could be a murderer, a thief, anything." "Are you?" James asked mildly. "No," Kerra said, "but that is not the point. The point is you have no reason to trust me. You have a 3-year-old daughter and you built a cabin with your own hands in the middle of nowhere," James said. "That tells me you are trying to build a life, not destroy one. And I have more space than I need and more supplies than I can use before they spoil. You would be doing me a favor, honestly. It gets quiet out here." He said it so plainly, so without guile, that Kerra did not know how to respond. She looked at the ruins of her home, at the scattered pieces of the life she had tried to build, and then back at this strange human man who had opened his door before she could knock. "I do not accept charity," she said finally. "If we stay, I work, I earn our keep." "Agreed," James said. "I could use help with the spring planting preparation, and the fence on the north side needs mending. We will be business partners then. You work, I provide shelter. Fair trade." Kerra wanted to argue, wanted to find the flaw in this arrangement, the hidden cost. But Mina was waiting back at the cabin, still recovering, and winter was far from over. Pride was a luxury she could not afford. "Fair trade," she echoed, and James offered his hand. She looked at it for a moment, this human gesture of agreement, and then clasped his forearm in the way of orc warriors. His grip was firm, his skin warm even through the cold, and when they released, something had shifted between them, some invisible line crossed. They returned to the cabin, and James set about making space for his unexpected guests. He strung a curtain across the middle of the room, giving Kerra and Mina the section with the bed, taking the floor near the fire for himself, despite her protests. He showed her where he kept the food stores, the water barrel, the tools and supplies, speaking to her as an equal, as someone whose opinion and knowledge mattered. Mina watched all of this with wide eyes, unused to seeing her mother interact with anyone, let alone a human. When James carved her a small wooden horse from a piece of scrap pine, working by firelight while Kerra mended the tears in their blankets, Mina's face lit up with delight, and she clutched the toy to her chest like treasure. "What do you say?" Kerra prompted. "Thank you," Mina said shyly, and James smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face into something gentler. "You are welcome. When the snow melts, I will show you where the horses graze in the summer. Real ones." The days fell into a pattern that felt both strange and natural. Kerra woke early, as she always had, and found that James was already awake, starting the fire, making coffee from precious beans he rationed carefully. They would eat together in comfortable silence, Mina chattering between them, and then Kerra would dress for the cold and go out to work. She mended the fence as promised, her orc strength making quick work of posts that had rotted or broken. She split wood for the fire, stacking it neatly under the eaves where it would stay dry. She checked the snares James had set for rabbits, and reset them with the efficiency of someone who had lived off the land before. In the afternoons, when the cold drove her inside, she worked on smaller tasks, repairing tools, carding wool from the small flock of sheep James kept in the barn, preparing hides for tanning. James worked alongside her when his own tasks allowed. and Kerra found herself learning his rhythms, the way he approached problems with methodical patience, the way he never wasted materials or effort. He had been a soldier, she learned in fragments of conversation, had fought in the border wars between the human kingdoms and the orc clans. He had been good at keeping people alive, less good at watching them die, and when the war ended he had taken his discharge pay and bought this land, as far from civilization as he could manage. "I wanted to build instead of destroy," he said one afternoon as they worked together to repair a saddle that had cracked in the cold. "I wanted to see if I could make something good." "And have you?" Kerra asked, threading the needle with waxed cord. James considered this, his hand still on the leather. "I thought I had, but it turns out good things are better when they are shared. A cabin is just a cabin when you are alone. It becomes a home when there are people in it." The words hung between them, and Kerra focused very hard on the stitching, unwilling to examine the warmth that bloomed in her chest at the implication. She told herself it meant nothing, that James was simply being kind, that he would have said the same to anyone who had stumbled into his life. But the lie grew harder to maintain as the weeks passed, and winter began its slow retreat. Mina bloomed under James's gentle attention, losing her shyness, chattering to him about everything and nothing. He listened with the same serious focus he brought to all things, asking questions that made her feel heard, teaching her small skills like how to whittle and how to identify animal tracks in the snow. Kerra watched them together and felt something painful and sweet twist beneath her ribs, a longing for something she had never thought to want. She had been 15 when she left the clans, unable to stomach the endless raiding, the casual cruelty toward anything weak. She had wandered for years, taking work where she could find it, fighting when she had to, until she had met a human merchant who looked at her and saw a person instead of a monster. That relationship had been brief and complicated, ending when he returned to his city and his family, but it had left her with Mina, and Kerra had never regretted that. She had built the cabin intending to raise her daughter away from hatred and war, to give her a childhood that was not about survival. Watching Mina laugh as James showed her how to make shadow puppets on the wall, Kerra realized her daughter was getting that childhood now here in this borrowed home. The realization terrified her. "You're thinking too loud," James said one evening after Mina had fallen asleep. They sat by the fire, Kerra mending clothes and James sketching plans for the roof reconstruction on a piece of slate. "I can hear the gears turning from here." Kerra looked up, startled. "I do not know what you mean." "You have been staring at the same tier for 10 minutes without sewing a single stitch," James said, not unkindly. "Whatever is worrying you, it might help to speak it." Kerra set down the mending, her hands restless. "This cannot last," she said finally. "You know that, yes? We cannot stay here forever, living like this." "Why not?" James asked, and he sounded genuinely curious, as though the idea of them leaving had not occurred to him. "Because I am an orc and you are human, and the world does not look kindly on such arrangements," Kerra said, forcing the words out. "Because eventually someone will come by, a trader or a traveler, and they will see us and they will talk. Because my clan would kill me if they knew where I was, and your people would kill me for existing too close to their borders." James set down his slate, giving her his full attention. "The nearest settlement is 3 days' ride from here. Traders come maybe twice a year, and I do my business with them outside, quickly. No one needs to know anything. And as for your clan or my people, they would have to find us first, and I did not pick this location by accident. I picked it because it is hard to find and easy to defend." "You cannot want this," Kerra insisted, standing, needing to move. "You cannot want an orc woman and her half-blood daughter living in your home permanently. It makes no sense. What do you gain from it?" James stood as well, and his voice when he spoke was quiet but firm. "I gain company that I enjoy. I gain help with work that is too much for one person. I gain the chance to watch a child grow up happy instead of watching young men bleed out in mud. I gain the possibility of building something that matters." He paused, and then added, more softly, "I gain the hope that maybe I am not meant to be alone forever." Kerra felt her breath catch, felt the weight of what he was not quite saying settle over her like a blanket. "You do not know me," she said, but it came out weak, without conviction. "I know you built a cabin alone while pregnant. I know you carried your daughter through a blizzard to save her life. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met and you never complain. I know you love Mina more than anything in the world. I know you hum when you think no one is listening, and you smile when Mina laughs, and you are the bravest person I have ever encountered." James took a step closer, and Kerra could not make herself step back. "What else do I need to know?" "I am afraid," Kerra whispered, and it was the truest thing she had said in years. "I am afraid to trust this. I am afraid it will be taken away." "So am I," James admitted. "I am terrified, but fear is a poor reason to reject something good." He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to move, to refuse, and when she did not, he touched her cheek with his fingertips, gentle as though she were made of glass. Kerra closed her eyes, leaning into the contact, and felt something inside her that had been locked tight for years begin to open. When she kissed him, it was not gentle or tentative. She kissed him like a warrior, fierce and claiming, and James met her with equal intensity, his arms coming around her, pulling her close. They broke apart breathing hard, staring at each other in the firelight, and Kerra saw her own wonder reflected in his face. "This is foolish," she said, not moving from his embrace. "Completely," James agreed and kissed her again. They navigated the new dimension of their relationship carefully, aware of Mina's presence, aware that they were building something fragile that could shatter if mishandled. During the day, they worked side by side as they had before, but now their hands would brush and linger. Now they would exchange glances that held promises for later. At night, after Mina slept, they would sit close by the fire, talking in low voices about their pasts, their hopes, the strange turns of fate that had brought them to this place. Kerra learned that James had grown up on a farm much like this one, that he had joined the army to escape a father who drank too much and struck too often, that he had found purpose in healing even as he hated the need for it. She learned that he had almost married once before the war, but the girl had died of fever the winter he was away, and he had carried the guilt of that for years. James learned that Kerra's mother had been a clan warrior of great renown, that Kerra herself had been trained from childhood to fight and kill, and never show weakness. He learned that she had walked away from all of it after watching her unit massacre a human farming village, unable to reconcile the honor her people claimed with the screams of children. He learned that she had been alone for most of her life, that trust was a luxury she had never been able to afford. "Until now," James said, holding her hand in his, tracing the lines of her palm. "You can afford it now." Spring came in a rush of melt water and mud, the world transforming from white to brown to the first tentative green. The work of rebuilding Kerra's cabin began in earnest, and it became a shared project, something they did together. James had been right that the walls were sound, and they salvaged what they could from the collapsed roof, supplementing with timber from James's own stores, and from trees they felled together. Mina helped by bringing them water and holding nails, chattering constantly, inventing elaborate stories about the cabin and the forest and the animals that lived there. She had taken to calling James Jay without any prompting, and he had accepted the nickname with good grace, responding as though he had been answering to it all his life. Watching them work together to place a birdhouse on a post near the new cabin, Kerra felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her over. This was family, she realized. This accidental, impossible thing they had built was family, and she wanted it with a fierceness that frightened her. The cabin took shape slowly, the rafters rising strong and true, the roof thatched with skill that came from James's experienced hands and Kerra's raw determination. They worked through the warming days, and when evening came they would return to James's cabin, tired and satisfied, eating together like they had always done this, like they would always do this. One night in late spring, with the cabin nearly complete and the stars bright overhead, James took Kerra's hand and led her outside, away from Mina, who was sleeping peacefully. "I have been thinking," he said, and there was nervousness in his voice that Kerra had never heard before. "About the future, about what happens when your cabin is finished." Kerra's heart sank. This was it then. The moment when he told her it had been good, but it was time for them to go, time for them to live separate lives again. She braced herself, calling up the armor she had learned to wear, preparing to pretend it did not hurt. "I do not want you to move back," James said in a rush. "I want you to stay, both of you. I want to make this official, permanent. I want to marry you if you will have me." "If that is something you would even want." Kerra stared at him, her mind gone blank with shock. "Marry," she repeated stupidly. "I know it is complicated," James said, speaking faster now, anxious. "I know there are laws against it in some places. I know people would talk if they knew, but out here it does not matter. Out here we make our own rules. We can have a life together, a real life. I can be a father to Mina if she will let me, and we can build this homestead into something amazing. And I know I am not romantic or smooth with words, but I love you, Kerra. I have loved you since you trusted me to care for your daughter, and I want to spend the rest of my life earning that trust every single day." The words poured out of him like water from a broken dam, and Kerra felt tears streaming down her face, her tusks aching the way they always did when emotion overwhelmed her. She had never cried in front of anyone before, had never let herself be this vulnerable, but James had seen her at her lowest already and had chosen to stay. "Yes," she said, and her voice broke on the word. "Yes, you ridiculous human. Yes, I will marry you." James's face split into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he picked her up, spinning her around like she weighed nothing despite her orc strength and solid build. When he set her down, they were both laughing, breathless and giddy, and they kissed under the stars while spring sang around them. They were married a week later in a ceremony of their own devising, with Mina as their only witness. James had carved rings from oak wood, simple and strong, and they exchanged them by the river as the sun rose, making promises to each other that were more binding than any law or custom. Kerra spoke her vows in Orcish and then in the common tongue, and James repeated his with equal solemnity, and when they kissed to seal their marriage, Mina cheered and threw flower petals she had collected for the occasion. The finished cabin became a workshop and storage space, and they expanded James's cabin instead, adding a room for Mina and a larger space for the three of them to live and grow. The work was hard but satisfying, and they fell into rhythms that felt ancient and new all at once. Summer brought the traders James had mentioned, rough men who traveled the frontier selling goods and buying furs and preserved foods. Kerra stayed inside during their visits, watching through the window with her hand on the knife she kept hidden, but the traders conducted their business and left without incident, without even asking about the second set of prints around the homestead. "They do not care," James said when she mentioned it later. "They care about profit, not about who I share my home with. And even if they did care, what would they do? They need me to have goods to buy next time they come through. Economics trumps bigotry when you are this far from civilization. Kerra wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that they could have this life without interruption. But she knew the world too well, knew that hatred had a long reach and a good memory. The test came in autumn, when the leaves were turning and Mina was helping James harvest the last of the garden. Kerra had gone to check the eastern boundary, maintaining the fence line, when she heard voices she did not recognize. She moved silently through the trees, using skills she had learned as a young warrior, and found 5 orcs setting up camp near the stream that marked the edge of James's property. Her heart hammered in her chest as she recognized the markings they wore. Bloodfang clan, raiders who ranged far from the traditional territories, taking what they wanted and killing anyone who resisted. She had fought alongside Bloodfangs in her youth, had learned cruelty from their example before she learned to hate it. The leader was a massive orc named Draka, scarred and mean, who had once tried to claim Kerra as a mate through combat. She had beaten him decisively, humiliating him in front of the clan, and he was not the type to forget such things. Kerra made her way back to the homestead as quickly as stealth allowed, her mind racing through options. They could run, take Mina and whatever they could carry and flee deeper into the wilderness. But the Bloodfangs would find their trail, would hunt them down because that was what Bloodfangs did. They could try to hide, but 5 trained warriors would find them eventually. Or they could fight, and Kerra knew with sick certainty that she could not protect both James and Mina against those odds. She found James in the barn, mucking out stalls, and the normalcy of the scene made her want to weep. He looked up at her approach and his expression shifted immediately, reading the danger in her body language. "What is it?" he asked, setting aside the rake. "Bloodfang orcs," Kerra said quietly. 5 of them, camped on the eastern boundary. They will find the homestead by tomorrow at the latest, probably sooner. James wiped his hands on his pants, his face going still and focused in a way that reminded Kerra he had been a soldier. "Do they know you are here?" "Not yet. But their leader knows me. If he sees me, he will want blood. Mine or yours or Mina's, it will not matter to him." Kerra forced herself to stay calm, to think tactically. "I need to lead them away. If I show myself and run, they will follow. It is what I would do." "Absolutely not," James said flatly. "You are not offering yourself as bait. We will think of something else." "There is nothing else," Kerra insisted. "James, you do not understand what these orcs are. They do not negotiate, they do not show mercy. If they find you and Mina, they will kill you both just for sport." "Then we fight," James said, and there was steel in his voice. "You said there are 5. We have the high ground, we know the terrain, and we have something they do not have." "What is that?" Kerra asked desperately. "Each other," James said. "You are the best warrior I know, and I am not useless in a fight. Together we can make this place defensible. And if worst comes to worst, you and Mina can escape while I hold them off." "No," Kerra said sharply. "I am not losing you, not to them, not to anyone." James cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "And I am not losing you. So we fight together and we survive together and we send these raiders running." "Agreed." Kerra wanted to argue, wanted to protect him the way she had learned to protect the few precious things in her life, by keeping them at a distance. But she had married this man, had built a life with him, and that meant trusting him as a partner, not treating him as something fragile to be hidden away. "Agreed," she said, and they began to plan. They spent the rest of the day preparing, moving with quiet urgency. James retrieved weapons from hidden caches around the homestead, bows and arrows, a sword he had kept from his army days, knives and hatchets. Kerra sharpened everything until the edges gleamed, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. They built barriers at the approaches to the cabin, subtle things that would channel attackers into kill zones, that would slow them down and make them vulnerable. Mina watched with wide, frightened eyes, and James knelt to speak with her at child height, his voice calm. "Some bad people might come here," he said. "If they do, I need you to hide in the cellar like we practiced and stay quiet no matter what you hear. Can you do that for me?" Mina nodded, her small hands clutching her wooden horse. "Will you and Mama be okay?" "We will do everything we can to make sure we all stay safe," James promised. And Kerra loved him even more for not lying, for respecting their daughter enough to tell the truth. The Bloodfangs came at dawn, when the mist was still rising from the ground. Kerra heard them before she saw them, the careless noise of warriors who did not expect resistance. She and James were positioned on the roof of the cabin, the highest point, with clear lines of sight and the advantage of surprise. Draka led his warriors into the clearing, and even after all these years, seeing him made Kerra's skin crawl. He was bigger than she remembered, more scarred, carrying a massive axe that was dark with old blood. The other orcs spread out in a practiced pattern, checking the barn, the workshop, moving toward the cabin. "I can smell you, Kerra," Draka bellowed, his voice carrying across the homestead. "I knew I would find you eventually, you and whatever weak blood mongrel you spawned. Come out and maybe I will make it quick." Kerra felt James tense beside her, felt his anger on her behalf and Mina's, and she put a hand on his arm in warning. They had agreed that the first strike had to count, had to even the odds immediately. She stood, making herself visible on the roof, and Draka's head snapped toward her, his tusked grin sharp and vicious. "There you are. I have been looking for you for years. You made a fool of me, and now I am going to repay that in blood." "You made a fool of yourself," Kerra called back. "I just helped everyone see what you already were." Draka roared and charged, and his warriors followed, and Kerra and James moved as one. The arrows flew first, 2 shots in perfect synchronization, and 2 of the Bloodfangs went down before they understood the danger. James's shot took an orc through the throat, a clean kill, and Kerra's arrow punched through the eye of a warrior she had once trained with, and she felt nothing but grim satisfaction. 3 left, and Draka was closing fast, too fast for another shot. Kerra dropped the bow and drew her sword, a good blade James had acquired for her, and she jumped from the roof to meet the charge head-on. She heard James moving on the roof behind her, heard the twang of another arrow, and then there was no time for anything but the fight. Draka was strong and brutal, fighting with the kind of wild aggression that would have worked against a lesser opponent. But Kerra had been trained by the best warriors of her clan before she left, and she had years of survival fighting that Draka lacked. She used his momentum against him, deflecting the axe and slicing across his ribs, opening a wound that bled freely but was not immediately fatal. The remaining Bloodfang warriors converged, and Kerra found herself fighting 2 at once, her blade moving in patterns she had thought forgotten. She heard James behind her, heard the clash of steel on steel, and knew he was engaged with the third. She could not afford to worry about him, could only trust that he knew what he was doing. One of her opponents overextended, and Kerra took his arm off at the elbow, his scream cutting short as she followed with a thrust to the heart. The other warrior hesitated, shocked by the speed of it, and Kerra used that hesitation to drive her blade through his throat. She spun to help James and found him standing over the body of the third warrior, breathing hard, blood on his sword and a cut on his arm but otherwise intact. Their eyes met for a brief moment, confirmation that they were both alive, and then Draka was on her again, roaring his fury. "You think you can defeat me?" he snarled, his axe whistling through the air. You are just a traitor who ran away. You are nothing." "I am everything you are not," Kerra said, her voice cold and clear. "I am someone who chose to build instead of destroy. I am someone who has a family worth protecting. And I am someone who is going to end you." She moved inside his guard, too close for the axe to be effective, and drove her blade up under his ribs, angling for the heart. Draka's eyes went wide with shock, and he tried to bring his axe down on her, but his strength was already failing. Kerra twisted the blade and stepped back, letting him fall. The clearing went silent except for the sound of their breathing. 5 bodies lay in the dirt, and Kerra and James stood among them, alive and victorious. James crossed to her immediately, his hands on her shoulders, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. "No," Kerra said, and then again with more certainty. "No, I am fine. You?" "Just a scratch," James said, glancing at his arm. "Nothing that will not heal." They stood together in the aftermath, and Kerra felt the weight of what they had done, what they had survived. She had killed today, had taken lives of people she had once known, and the girl she had been 10 years ago would have felt nothing. But the woman she was now felt the sorrow of it, the waste. "They would have killed us all," James said quietly, reading her thoughts. "They would have killed Mina." "You did what you had to do." "I know," Kerra said. "It does not make it easier." They collected Mina from the cellar, and their daughter ran to them, throwing her arms around both of them, crying with relief. They held her between them, a family bound by blood and choice, and Kerra felt the fear begin to drain away, replaced by fierce gratitude. They buried the bodies far from the homestead, unmarked graves that would be reclaimed by the forest. James spoke a simple prayer over them, words about peace and forgiveness, and Kerra added her own in Orcish, a warrior's blessing for those who had died in battle. It was the least she could do, the last respect she could offer to people who had once been her kin, however estranged. The work of cleaning and repairing took days, and they did it together, erasing the signs of violence from their home. Kerra found herself watching the tree line compulsively, waiting for the next threat, but as the weeks passed and nothing came, she began to relax. The Bloodfang clan was large, but 5 warriors disappearing would not necessarily trigger an investigation, not when they ranged so far from the core territories. James healed from his cut and teased her about leaving him the easy opponent, and Kerra teased him back about his dramatic sword work. And slowly, the homestead returned to the peaceful rhythms they had built. Mina had nightmares for a while, waking crying from dreams of bad orcs, but they comforted her together, and eventually the nightmares faded, winter came again, and this time Kerra faced it without fear. The roof over their heads was strong, the stores were full, and she had James beside her and Mina between them. They spent the long evenings by the fire, James teaching Mina her letters while Kerra worked on the leather goods they would trade in the spring. Sometimes James would play the wooden flute he had carved, simple melodies that filled the cabin with warmth, and Mina would dance, and Kerra would watch them with her heart so full it hurt. She had never imagined this life was possible, had never dreamed that she could have peace, could have love, could have a family that chose her as much as she chose them. The girl who had fled the orc clans all those years ago would not have believed it. The woman who had built a cabin alone would not have dared to hope for it. But the woman she was now, the woman who had fought beside her human husband to defend their home, who watched her daughter grow in safety and happiness, that woman knew better. She knew that the best things in life were the ones you built yourself, with your own hands and heart, with the people who saw you clearly and loved you anyway. On the spring morning when Kerra woke to find James already up, making coffee and humming one of his tuneless songs, she felt overwhelmed by the ordinary beauty of it. She rose and crossed to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his shoulder. "I love you," she said, the words still feeling new despite how often she spoke them now. "I love this life we have built." James turned in her arms, kissing her forehead, her tusks, her lips. "I love you too, and I am grateful every single day that your roof collapsed." Kerra laughed, swatting his arm. "You are a terrible man." "I am your terrible man," James corrected, grinning. "There is a difference." Mina came stumbling out of her room, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and James scooped her up, spinning her around while she giggled. Kerra watched them and thought about the future, about the years stretching ahead of them. There would be challenges, she knew. There would be threats and difficulties and days when the world seemed determined to tear apart what they had built. But they would face it together, this impossible family, this human man and orc woman and the child they both loved. They would stand against whatever came, and they would survive, and they would teach their daughter that love was stronger than hatred, that building was better than destroying, that choosing your own path was the bravest thing you could do. The snow had crushed her roof that winter night, but it had opened the door to something better, something she had never known to look for. And James had been there, waiting with his hand extended, offering not charity but partnership, not pity but love. Kerra poured herself coffee and joined her family at the table. And as they planned the day's work together, she felt the contentment of someone who had finally found their way home. Years passed in the way of all things, measured in seasons and growth rings, and the slow accumulation of memories. Mina grew tall and strong, inheriting her mother's green skin and her father's dark eyes, a bridge between two worlds who navigated both with the confidence of someone who had always been loved. She learned farming and fighting, letters and leatherwork, moving between her parents' teachings with easy grace. The traders who came through grew accustomed to the sight of the orc woman who worked alongside James Thornton, and if they thought it strange, they kept their opinions to themselves. The homestead flourished, expanding year by year, and other frontier families began to settle within a day's ride. People who were running from something or towards something. People who understood that out here you made your own rules. Some of them were human. Some were orcs, some were other races entirely, and they formed a loose community bound not by blood or species, but by the shared understanding that the frontier was for those who did not fit anywhere else. They helped each other with harvests and barn raisings. They traded goods and news, and they did not ask uncomfortable questions about each other's pasts. James and Kerra became the unofficial leaders of this scattered settlement, the ones people came to for advice or mediation or help. They had proven they could defend their home, had proven they could build something lasting, and that earned respect that transcended the usual prejudices. On the 10th anniversary of the night the snow crushed Kerra's roof, they held a celebration, inviting all their neighbors to the homestead for a feast. Mina was 13 now, helping to cook and serve, laughing with the other children of the frontier. Kerra stood beside James, his hand warm in hers, and looked out at the gathering of humans and orcs and everything in between, all of them sharing food and stories under the stars. "We did this," James said quietly, wonder in his voice. "We built this community." "We did," Kerra agreed. "We built it by not giving up, by choosing to trust when trust was hard, by believing that there was a better way than the old hatreds." An old orc woman from one of the neighboring homesteads approached them, leaning on a carved stick, her face a map of years and wisdom. "You have given us something precious," she said in Orcish, and James squeezed Kerra's hand because he had learned the language over the years, had learned it so he could speak to her in the tongue of her childhood. You have shown us that we do not have to choose between our blood and our hearts, that we can make new families, new clans, new ways of being. Thank you for that gift." Kerra felt tears sting her eyes, and she bowed to the elder in the way of orc warriors showing respect. "We only did what we had to do," she said. "We only chose love over fear." "That is the bravest choice there is," the elder said, and moved on to sample the roasted meat. James pulled Kerra close, dancing with her slowly to the music. Someone was playing on a fiddle, and she let herself lean into him, let herself feel the safety of being known and loved. Mina caught her eye across the fire and grinned, waving, and Kerra waved back, her heart full to bursting. This was the life she had built, brick by brick, choice by choice, starting from the moment James had opened his door before she could knock. This was the family she had made, the community she had helped create, the future she had carved out of nothing but determination and hope and the willingness to try. The snow had crushed her roof at midnight, and it had felt like the end of everything. But it had been the beginning, the moment when her solitary existence had cracked open to let in light and love and possibility. Years later, when Kerra was old and her tusks were gray and Mina had children of her own playing in the yard, she would sit on the porch of the expanded cabin and watch the sun set over the land they had tamed and tended. James would sit beside her, his hair white now, his hands weathered but still strong, and they would hold hands in comfortable silence. "You ever regret it?" she asked him once when the grandchildren had been put to bed and the night was soft around them. "Do you ever wish you had chosen a simpler life, a human wife, a path without so much struggle?" James turned to look at her, and his eyes held the same warmth they had held that first night, when he had seen an orc woman and her injured child and had chosen kindness over fear. "Not for a single moment," he said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Mina and this whole beautiful mess we have created. I would choose it all again, every single time." Kerra leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought about the roads not taken, the lives not lived. She could have stayed with the clans, could have become a great warrior, could have died in some meaningless raid before ever knowing that another way existed. She could have refused James's help that winter night, could have tried to survive alone, could have lost everything to pride. But she had made different choices, had been brave enough to knock on a stranger's door, to accept help, to build trust, to love despite every reason not to. And those choices had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this family and community and life that exceeded anything she could have imagined. The snow had crushed her roof at midnight, and James had opened his door before she could even knock, and in that moment, both of their lives had changed forever. It had been the beginning of something beautiful, something worth fighting for, something that would outlast them both in the memories of children and grandchildren, who would tell the story of how an orc woman and a human man had built a home on the frontier and created a new world in miniature. As the stars came out above them, and the night sounds of the wilderness rose in gentle chorus, Kerra closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, a prayer of gratitude for the chance to live, to love, to build something good in a world that often seemed determined to destroy. And she thought with fierce certainty that if she had it all to do over again, she would not change a single moment, would not alter a single choice, because this life, this imperfect, impossible, wonderful life, was exactly what she had been meant to find. And it had started with a crushed roof, a midnight storm, and a door opening to let her in from the cold.